Wall running and jumping from rooftops are two things that come to mind when you think of parkour, but does Stride Fates really deserve the hate it's getting around its use of AI? By the end of this video, you'll be able to answer that before spending your hard-earned money. Stride Fates released hours before I dived into this fast-paced experience that feels something straight out of a futuristic action movie. I'm Amalgam, and I'm all about the VR experience, which is everything when it comes to virtual reality. I'm also very congested while recording this, so I apologize in advance. That said, let's dig a little deeper and review this heavily criticized VR title. You can't have a fleshed out parkour experience without wall running, and this game's version of it is really fluid. First you get a running start, then you jump at a wall while swinging your arms because that's how running works in this game. It's an immersive way of sprinting, but it's not without its own fair share of bugs. For example, if you hit a static object like a building at a weird angle while already running, you might get stuck in some pretty awkward situations. It can be annoying, but it's something you can mostly work around with a bit of practice. You also need to practice your street fighting skills because this game's take on melee combat is surprisingly refreshing for VR. Swinging weapons and fighting up close feels almost natural when you factor out the occasional weird movement from the enemy AI. Sometimes they move in strange ways, but aside from that, you can use random objects and of course your own fists to fight it out if guns aren't an option. This game does have weapon customization, which is unexpected but not necessarily surprising. You collect these colored pouches throughout the levels, each with different rarity levels, and these components, if you have enough of them, can be used to upgrade your weapons. Speaking of which, you should upgrade the amount of VR content in your life by subscribing for more VR content. Shameless plug aside, as a mechanic, weapon customization is well implemented here. And there's also this weirdly interesting cyberspace hacking mechanic. Unlocking certain doors will require you to finish a virtual parkour obstacle course. It's virtual reality within virtual reality, and the red guys kind of remind me of the super hot VR mobs, but I digress. Hacking in this game is a unique experience, and I'm all for it. One thing I'm not all for though is how sick this game can make you. I'll preface this part with a warning. This game is not for you if you are afraid of heights. The game involves a lot of free climbing, jumping from skyscrapers, and swinging from drones. One big reason acrophobia is a concern is the lack of a vignette option for this game. Vignettes help reduce motion sickness by darkening the edges of your vision, and this game seems like the perfect candidate for such a feature. It's really surprising that it's missing here actually. And on the topic of things that are missing, there are no in-game graphical settings. This means you can't adjust the visual quality to match your preferences, which may or may not have a negative effect on your experience. From what I can tell, at the very least, this game is well optimized, so you shouldn't be haunted by stuttering or visual bugs. But if you've tried Stride Fates and have had performance problems, let me know in the comments, I'm curious. Now, one thing I am not a fan of is automatic reloading. You know, that mechanic where you reload by bringing your gun to your waist. I personally don't like it because it's just not that immersive. And the bad news is that it's automatic by default. Plus, it doesn't work if you're looking down, which took me 5 minutes to figure out and can be really frustrating during intense moments. There is good news though. This can be changed in the settings for the more immersive manual version of reloading. Weird how this isn't default, and it's probably part of the reason this game is getting so much hate, since not everyone takes the time to go crazy in their settings before diving in. After reading the reviews for this game though, I have managed to pin down one of the reasons Stride Fates is getting so much criticism. Themes are a combination of story and setting, and this developer definitely let AI do the heavy lifting on this one. Or at least that's what myself and a large portion of the community originally thought. This video is actually a re-upload following the unlisting of my original review. A viewer named Frontways Larry, thank you by the way, told me of an official statement released by the developers on the use of AI in their game. Everything from the characters' scripts to their backgrounds and even the city itself legitimately feels like it could have been designed by ChatGPT. But apparently this game, for the most part, has very little AI design in it. You know, outside of the AI you need to control the enemies, because that kind of AI has existed in video games for eons. In this game, you play as Nick, a guy driven by his desire for a better life. He grew up in the slums of Iron City, the setting of this game, where he learned parkour to navigate his very own concrete jungle. He works for Skychase, which is essentially a branch of the police that specifically targets known criminals. Now, the flow of this story is actually pretty good. You have a driven main character, interesting if not supportive side characters, and a narrative that leaves you wanting to know more, all things considered. But let's talk about why gamers still think this game is voiced by AI, even though the developers say it's not. In general, dialogue in this game is just poorly written. This can affect how the voice actors deliver them, making them sound way off at times.
It's been reported the traces of that case. A chaser have been found near the vital.
It's pretty easy to see why players believe the voice acting in this game is AI with the mid-sentence, pitch, and mood changes.
Take a knife and quietly eliminate the nearest antivirus. Move on without attracting attention.
Something really cool though is how the enemies talk to each other. They have some pretty brutal choice words, and it's fascinating to hear them communicate based on what's happening in the game. It definitely increases immersion factors, especially when the enemies are telling each other that you're out of ammo while you're running around looking for more. Looking for ammo is a pretty generous phrase here, since you don't have to look hard for ammo on the default setting. But speaking of looking, moving across rooftops would be a lot less appealing if these generic looking buildings looked exactly alike. But while they have similar design, they don't feel the same. That's pretty important when you spend a lot of your time around these structures. They have just the right amount of variance, which keeps the similarities from capturing your attention and dragging you out of the experience. Now, when it comes to the NPCs and most of the objects you interact with, the graphics are just a smidge above 2024 virtual reality. Components used to upgrade your weapons and the NPCs themselves are noticeably more pleasant to look at compared to some of the more unpolished surfaces in the game. One thing that needs mentioning is the light problem. There are some instances where lighting flickers in a way that could be very disruptive to your experience, and even worse, seizure-inducing. This is clearly a bug that doesn't belong, and if the devs are watching this, please fix this ASAP. I'm not prone to seizures or anything, but at one point, this made me take off my headset, and if it can make me uncomfortable, I can't imagine how uncomfortable it'd be to someone not used to random lighting bugs when trying out new games. That aside, the good news is, for all intents and purposes, this game is pretty well paced. We're not quite done yet though. If you've made it this far into the video, then this next part should be familiar, because I'm going to score everything I've talked about so far to see how it stacks up to your typical 2024 VR experience. Immersion used to be a category of its own, but immersion and experience are essentially the same thing, so immersion will be the final score. That said, mechanics gets a 3 out of 6. Stride Fates has its entire identity built around hardcore parkour. Cyberspace and combat aside, there are some noticeable hiccups with movement that will noticeably affect your experience. Options gets a 2 out of 6 because with no vignette option or other options that can help reduce motion sickness, this game will likely be unplayable for a large portion of the VR community. Theme gets a 5 out of 6. The developers say the storyline wasn't written by AI, but regardless, it's definitely not a boring plot. Gloss over the poor writing and you have all the makings of a great story, character development, and surprises included. Audio gets a 4 out of 6. Voice acting takes some getting used to, but with the amount of emotion in them, they shockingly grow on you the more you play. While poorly written dialogue can affect the delivery of certain lines, it's interesting that enemies can communicate with each other based on what you're doing. Graphics gets a 3 out of 6. Most NPCs and interactive objects are pretty good looking, even if the vast majority of textures look average. You can't change the graphics settings in-game, but they look good enough out of the box, so it is what it is. All that said, Stride Fates offers something of a mixed experience. The parkour vibe here is very real, and even with the problems around it, it's a nice balance between this game's primary mechanic and its overarching theme. For that reason, Stride Fates has earned an immersion score of 3.5 out of 6. Barely above average, but above average is above average, am I right? And if you think this video is above average, you should subscribe for more VR content coming your way weekly. If you like games that put you in the heat of the action, you should check out my review of Contractor Showdown, link in the description. There's also a link in the description to the developer statement released about the use of AI in this game, so check that out if you're interested. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay immersed.